Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world that is damp, smoky, and more than a little terrifying, the life of a medieval doctor. You open your eyes to a dawn that already smells wrong. The streets outside your window reek of slop buckets tipped too early, of animals that didn't bother waiting for daylight, of neighbors whose coughs sound like warnings written in phlegm. You pull your thin blanket tighter, knowing that soon you'll be summoned to examine yet another patient who expects miracles while you, honestly, are just trying to avoid becoming one yourself. And here's the cheeky reality check: if you lived in this time, you probably wouldn't survive the week. But hey, at least you'd go out with style, a beak mask stuffed with rosemary and maybe a jar of urine in your hand. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I want to know where in the world you're listening to this right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle to the shutter and push it open with creaking wood. Pale light spreads across muddy alleys, where chickens peck between wagon ruts and people already bargain for bread. The first thing you notice isn't the bustle but the background chorus of coughs. In this century, sickness doesn't take holidays. Every morning begins with a kind of roulette. Will today's patients be simple stomachaches, or signs of plague? The townsfolk already know where you live. You hear the knock of a stick on your doorframe. A messenger boy, barefoot, pale as if he swallowed chalk, croaks out the first summons. Someone's father has collapsed near the tannery. You sigh because you know what that means. The tannery is a stinkhole of urine, lime, and animal carcasses, a place that invents its own diseases. Your day begins before you've even washed your face. You splash water from a basin that hasn't been fresh since yesterday, rub at your eyelids, and mutter half a prayer. Hygiene here is more suggestion than reality. Mainstream fact: medieval physicians believed that foul smells carried disease itself, miasma. The idea wasn't entirely wrong, though not for the reasons they thought. Bad odors often did mean bad sanitation, which really does spread illness. Historians still argue whether this obsession with air quality helped or hindered. Did it save lives through crude sanitation, or waste energy while germs were ignored? You tug on your day's clothes, a long robe, patched but respectable enough. Then a hood against the mist. The famous plague doctor beak mask isn't everyday wear, that'll come out only when you're near the worst cases, but you still keep bundles of herbs in your pockets. A little rosemary or lavender to sniff when a smell grows unbearable. You joke to yourself, medieval Febreze. Joke 1 delivered, your kit waits in its wooden chest. Flasks for urine inspection, a leather pouch of leeches, a small set of knives for letting blood, and a battered notebook where you've copied bits of Galen, Avicenna, and whoever else you could find in the university manuscripts. Knowledge is precious, but in truth, most patients just want to see bottles and instruments. They equal authority. It's the medieval version of a doctor's white coat. Stepping outside, you brace against the wet chill. The streets are already streaked with chamber pot contents, dumped before you rose. You step around one particularly fragrant puddle, muttering thanks to your thick leather shoes. A neighbor coughs at you, clutching her shawl. "You'll be busy today, Master Doctor," she says. You nod grimly, thinking, I already am. On the way to the tannery, you pass the marketplace. Merchants spread their wares, mixing smells of fresh bread with salted fish, hides, and onions. But in between are sights less pleasant: a woman bent double with stomach pain, a child scratching furiously at a rash, an old man spitting into the mud. People eye you as you walk by, some with hope, others with suspicion. Medicine is half science, half theater. They expect you to look like you know things even when you're guessing. The tannery stench hits before you arrive. Inside, a man lies collapsed against a beam, his breath shallow, his skin flushed. You kneel, press your hand to his wrist, counting his pulse. It thuds unevenly. His wife hovers, wringing her apron. Too much bad air, you declare, though you know it's more complicated. You pull out a flask and motion for a chamber pot. Soon enough, you're holding a sample of the man's urine up to the light, squinting at its color. Pale. Dark. Cloudy. This is your diagnostic crystal ball. Quirky tidbit: urine charts in medieval medicine had dozens of shades, each meaning a different imbalance. Physicians sometimes even tasted it, yes, tasted, to check sweetness, a crude test that occasionally identified diabetes centuries before blood sugar meters. You, mercifully, just sniff, the tannery workers murmur. Your pronouncement must sound confident, the humors are misaligned, too much heat in the blood. The wife nods, relieved to have words even if the cure is uncertain. You promise to bleed him later, then send for leeches, thinking, another long day begins, and as the dawn rolls toward mid-morning, you realize, every day is like this. You wake, you smell, you listen, you diagnose with flasks and prayers. And you try, against all odds, to convince both yourself and your patients that you can hold the sickness at bay. You trudge back from the tannery to your own quarters, the stink still stitched into your cloak. If you're going to make it through the day, you need to prepare properly, not just your mind but your costume. Being a doctor in this century is as much theater as it is medicine, and the audience demands the right outfit. First, the robe. Heavy wool, dyed dark not for fashion but to hide stains that inevitably arrive. You tug it over your head, grimacing at the scratchy weave. The hood follows, shrouding your hair in the kind of mystery patients seem to find reassuring. People don't want to see your sweat, they want to believe in wisdom, and a little fabric goes a long way. Then the gloves. Stiffened leather that smells faintly of tannin. Not sterile, not by a mile, but they keep the worst of the muck from your fingernails. Mainstream fact: plague doctors, especially in later centuries, wore long leather coats waxed against fluids and gloves to protect their skin. The look was iconic, though historians still argue whether it was truly common in the 14th century or became widespread only during the later waves of plague in the 17th. Either way, the image of a masked, leather-clad figure has survived more stubbornly than most of the patients did. Ah yes, the mask. The beak waits on your shelf, absurd and sinister all at once. You hold it up, studying the glass discs for eyes. The long curve that juts like some monstrous bird's nose. Into the cavity, you stuff herbs, rosemary, lavender, wormwood, sometimes even cloves if you can afford them. The belief is simple: if foul air carries disease, then sweet air must defend you. It is perfume as armor. You slide the mask on, adjusting the straps. Your breath warms the beak instantly, and the smell of herbs presses against your nostrils. It's ridiculous, and you know it. But ridiculous feels safer than bare skin when the streets reek of rot. Joke 1, you glance at your reflection in a metal pan and mutter. I look like a bird auditioning for the world's worst carnival. Your tools lie in a leather satchel, each with its own personality. The bleeding bowl, shallow and wide, etched with lines so you can measure exactly how much life you've let out of someone. The knives, sharpened on stone, glinting in the half-light. The leech jar, its inhabitants wriggling languidly in a puddle of pond water. You tuck in a set of syrups and powders, dried rose petals, a little vinegar, chalk ground to dust. Patients expect mixtures, whether they heal is secondary. You add a vial of theriac, the universal antidote that is anything but universal. Quirky tidbit: theriac recipes sometimes listed more than 60 ingredients, including viper flesh and opium. Apothecaries guarded it like treasure, claiming it cured everything from snakebite to plague. Was it effective? Not really, but it made patients feel they were swallowing sophistication. Finally, you strap a cane to your wrist. Not for leaning, but for poking. When you don't want to touch a patient directly, the cane does the prodding: lift the blanket, check the pulse, keep a safe distance. It's also useful for smacking dogs that get too curious about the herbs dangling from your belt. Joke 2, the first multifunctional tool, half medical probe, half medieval dog swatter. You take stock in the mirrorless way doctors must: robe heavy, gloves snug, mask fragrant, cane ready. You are now both healer and omen, a walking contradiction. People will fear you as much as they trust you. And perhaps that's the point. Fear keeps distance, and distance keeps you breathing one more day. Still, inside the beak, you're just a tired human trying not to inhale too much death. You roll your shoulders, slip the satchel strap across your chest, and practice the solemn gait that makes patients nod with awe. Your stomach growls, but breakfast can wait. The town expects the bird-faced miracle worker, not a man chewing bread in a gutter. Historians still argue whether the mask actually helped. Some insist it was better than nothing, blocking fleas or droplets. Others say it was placebo wrapped in leather. You don't care. What matters is that when you step outside dressed like this, people scatter. The crowd opens before you. Sick or healthy, they respect the bird, and as you head toward the market square where the day's consultations await, you feel both absurd and powerful, half charlatan, half savior. The costume is ridiculous, yes, but in a world where even fresh air is suspect, maybe ridiculous is the only kind of shield you get. Joke 3 drifts from your lips, muffled by herbs. If I faint in this thing, someone please check my humors before looting my leeches. With that, you march into the morning, the plague doctor fully assembled, ready to diagnose the chaos of the marketplace with nothing more than urine, guesses, and the conviction stitched into your robes. The cobblestones of the market are slick from yesterday's rain, and the square hums with noise, vendors crying out prices, chickens squawking, children darting under carts. You walk slowly, deliberately, letting the crowd notice the long beak of your mask and the cane swinging lightly at your side. As expected, people part like you carry both death and salvation in equal measure. Some cross themselves, others bow slightly, and one man mutters a prayer under his breath as though your passing were an omen. A woman clutches your sleeve first. She thrusts a little clay flask into your hand, warm from being carried against her body. You unstopper it, holding the opening to the light. Inside, cloudy urine swirls amber and frothy. You tilt it, studying its thickness, then sniff, gingerly. Mainstream fact: medieval physicians often diagnosed disease by uroscopy, comparing urine to carefully painted charts of 30 or more shades. You mutter something about imbalanced collar and stomach heat, and the woman nods like you've just confirmed her fears. Historians still argue whether these charts were genuine attempts at precision science or merely elaborate props in the performance of authority. Either way, people swore by them. You return the flask and tell her to feed her husband boiled barley with honey. The advice is gentle enough to seem wise, and she presses a copper coin into your glove. You slip it into your pouch, knowing barley water won't cure much, but at least it won't kill him either. Another patient steps forward, wheezing. His breath rattles like dry leaves, his eyes ringed with gray. He insists you take his pulse, thrusting out a skinny wrist. You set your gloved fingers against his vein, feeling the weak flutter. You look serious, count to yourself, and nod sagely. The spleen works too hard, you declare. He gasps, I knew it. Joke 1, muttered behind the mask, yes, your spleen is overworked from carrying all that superstition. Soon you're surrounded. Someone holds up a child with a rash like tiny stars across her arms. Another insists you examine his tongue, sticking it out proudly as if showing treasure. You wave your cane, gesturing for space. The crowd obeys reluctantly, curiosity winning over fear. You set down your satchel and withdraw the leech jar. The sight alone makes people murmur. You pick one plump, wriggling creature and hold it up for all to see, explaining that leeches can draw out the excess humors causing fevers. Quirky tidbit: leeches weren't just a medical tool but also an economic commodity, traded across Europe in jars. harvested by wading into ponds and letting them latch onto legs. A dangerous day job for peasants, but a profitable one. The wheezing man begs for the treatment. You oblige, pressing the leech to his skin until it latches, its small body swelling as it feeds. He groans, convinced healing has begun. You reassure him, though privately you know he might just faint from blood loss. Still, the crowd approves. The theater of medicine has worked again. Between patients, you glance at the stalls. Herbs dangle in fragrant bundles, sage, thyme, rue, all claiming protective powers. A fishmonger slaps his wares onto the table, scales flying, and you wonder how many stomach cramps today will come from that. Over by the bread sellers, a boy sneezes into the loaves. You shake your head under the mask, half laughing at the futility of your role. Joke 2 whispers through your thoughts, step right up, disease is free with every purchase. You're handed another flask, this one pale and thin. You sniff, trying not to grimace, and pronounce it safe, just a touch of phlegm imbalance. Avoid cold baths, you advise, and the patient beams. Avoiding baths is already the town's favorite hobby. By mid-morning, your pouch is heavier with coins, your mask clotted with the scents of rosemary and sweat, and your patience thin. You wave your cane one last time, declaring you must attend to wealthier clients. The crowd groans, but they part, already murmuring about your wisdom. As you trudge away from the marketplace, you realize the irony. You've given out barley water, herbs, and a few leeches, but mostly you've given reassurance. People need the performance more than the cure. Historians still argue whether medieval medicine was charlatanry with props or an earnest proto-science. To you, it's survival, for them and for you. Joke 3 surfaces as you duck into an alley toward your next call. Another day, another flask of pee. Truly, I've peaked. You leave the square and follow the lane that pretends not to be a drain, climbing toward the richer quarter where roofs keep their tiles and windows hoard glass like treasure. A steward meets you at a gate fat with ironwork, bows just enough to honor your mask without loving it, and ushers you into a courtyard that smells of rosewater instead of tanner's pits. The contrast nudges a tired smile across your face. Same coughs, better curtains. Inside, rushes carpet the floor, fresh laid and sprinkled with herbs to sweeten the air. A brazier glows in a corner, and a servant with red cheeks hovers over a kettle. The lady of the house lies under embroidered hangings, one hand pressed delicately to her temple as if illness were shy and needed coaxing. Another servant steps forward with the expected prop, a clear glass flask, warm from the patient's chamber. You tilt, watch the amber catch the light through the beak's round eyes, and let the room wait on your verdict. Mainstream fact, the glass urinal, metulla, became the emblem of physicians from Paris to Bologna. It was medicine's logo before logos were cool. Historians still argue whether the metulla's diagnostic power was more practical observation or persuasive theater, but in rooms like this it buys you silence long enough to think. You sniff politely, rosemary in your mask versus reality at the rim, and pronounce the fluid too colored by half. The steward nods as if he suspected the same. Servants love being right about their mistress's humors. You ask gentle questions, sleep, appetite, bowels, tiptoed around with noble vocabulary, the timing of last month's moon. The answers HEW to the same pattern these rooms always hum: too many rich dishes, too little fresh air, too many winter feasts that parch the mouth and slow the stomach. You draw back the bed curtains and take her pulse, 2 fingers warm against a wrist that wears more gold than some altars. Her eyes track yours, worried and hopeful. You speak softly through the beak, heat where coolness should be, dryness where moisture should govern. She sighs into the pillow. You prescribe a cooling regimen, pear syrup, barley water sweetened with honey. Remember that barley water from the market, a broth of chickpea and dill, and for her restlessness, a sachet of violets at the pillow. From your satchel you produce a tiny paper twist of powdered rose and sugar to be taken after supper. The room relaxes into a ballet of curtsies and note-taking. quirky tidbit floats up as you rearrange your tools on a polished chest. In grand houses, some physicians recommended a change of scenery not as metaphor but as literal prescription. Travel to a garden with a fountain appears in more than one handbook. And if the patient can afford a fountain, well, surely the water cures half the complaint. You do not add a fountain to the recipe, but you motion the steward to unseal a shutter and let honest air inside. The lady protests the draft. You counter with a lecture from the regiment of Salerno about fresh breezes and moderate exercise, the medieval equivalent of go outside sometimes. Next door a boy whimpers. The steward looks panicked. You follow him to a small chamber where a young page shivers, cheeks blotched, throat angry. A priest stands nearby with a prayer book already open. You nod to him. His work and yours often share the bed. Mainstream fact. Learned physicians in many cities trained at universities, Paris, Montpellier, Bologna, reading Galen and Avicenna, while surgeons and barber-surgeons handled hands-on work. The wealthy bought the physician's words and the surgeon's steel separately. Historians still argue whether physicians actually touched patients much beyond pulse and urine in elite homes, or whether the physical work was always delegated. Here, you compromise with reality. For the boy, you order a poultice of fig and vinegar for the throat, and, because the house expects procedures like proof, a gentle bleeding at the ankle to draw excess heat downward. The priest blinks, the steward pales, the household barber is fetched, rolling up sleeves like a man about to bargain with fate. You draw the bleeding bowl from your kit, its lines ready to mark how much balance you have supposedly restored. Your cane does the pointing, your voice does the calming, the barber's steady hand does the cut. The page whimpers into a linen roll. You fix the poultice and promise the fever will break with the moon's next rise. In truth, you've given him rest, fluids, and a reason to be fussed over, sometimes enough, sometimes not. While servants mop and murmur, the master of the house arrives in a swirl of fur and impatience, insisting upon a consultation worthy of his tax bracket. He has vapors, he says gravely, which you translate to stress, indigestion, and the universal ache of responsibility. He prefers remedies that sound expensive. Luckily, you carry a small vial of theriac, the luxury syrup of our age. He eyes it like a knight eyes a relic. You allow 1 spoonful in Hippocras, spiced wine strained through a bag, then pivot to counsel disguised as authority, fewer late banquets, fewer roasted meats. More walks, a light electuary of almond and sugar after meals. Joke 1 taps at your mask, look at you, inventing salad. He waves you toward a cabinet displaying 2 antidotes, a bezoar stone set in silver and what he swears is unicorn horn. You try not to snort. Quirky tidbit, many a noble poured fortunes into ground jewels and narwhal tusks marketed as unicorn. They were believed to neutralize poison. The placebo was strong, the horn, unfortunately, was a whale. You nod gravely. One does not argue theology with a wallet, then suggest the bezoar stay a display piece, better to lean on figs and fennel for today's discomforts. The steward returns with a star chart unrolled like a sail. He asks if the hour suits bleeding. You squint at Mars, warm and bossy, and at the moon inching through a damp sign. Proceed only lightly, you decree. Mainstream fact, astrological medicine shaped calendars for surgery and phlebotomy, leaflets listed which veins to open under which zodiac. Historians still argue whether physicians believed the heavens controlled outcomes or simply used astrology to pace interventions and reassure anxious patrons. Either way, the chart earns you another nod, which is sometimes the only medicine anyone swallows. Between rooms you wash your hands in rosewater, a gesture as symbolic as it is hygienic, and accept a napkin thick as a bishop's sermon. A maid brings a bowl of candied ginger. You take a piece with theatrical reluctance and a very real gratitude. Joke 2, doctor's orders, purely preventative snacking. The ladies' chamber smells sweeter now. You step back in to revise instructions, no heavy meat for 3 days, gentle walks in the cloistered garden, and a sleeping draught of lettuce seed and poppy if prayer fails. You scribble a recipe for the apothecary in a hand that looks learned because it has to. The steward will send a boy to fetch it at once. Mainstream fact, the physician wrote, the apothecary mixed, the surgeon cut, 3 guilds, 3 reputations, often 3 egos. Historians still argue whether these roles cooperated smoothly or sniped over patients like rival choirs. Today, you choose cooperation, tomorrow, who knows? At the threshold, the master presses a coin purse into your gloved palm, heavy enough to remind you why your rounds climb this hill. Payment can be coin or kind. Some houses send you off with wine, spices, even a bolt of good cloth. You accept the purse, then add one last order with a seriousness that fills your mask, air the bed linens. Son is a physician, no fee. They nod, impressed you've conscripted the sky into their care team. Back in the corridor, you pause beside the family chapel. A stone saint stares down with the detachment of someone who's seen every remedy tried and every patient eventually fail the final exam. You nod back, a professional courtesy between specialists. Joke 3, under your breath, colleague, your outcomes are consistent. You step into the courtyard again, herbs in your beak, rose on your hands, copper warm at your waist. The street below waits with its buckets and griefs, no tapestries to soften the echoes there. Still, the rituals of this house call cling to you, the charts, the metulla, the measured bowl, the perfume of expertise. Whether you've healed or simply staged a convincing rescue, you've bought the household time and calm, which are medicines in their own right. And you head downhill thinking of the next knock, the next draft, the next attempt to balance a body with words and water and the theater of care. You step back into the street, purse heavier, mask hot, and realize the day has only begun. Already another boy waits near the fountain, hopping from foot to foot, sent to fetch you for a neighbor who has too much blood in the head. You sigh, always blood. Always the humor's out of joint. You follow him through alleys until you're led into a dim room where a pale man reclines on a straw mattress, temples throbbing, his wife wringing her apron. You know the ritual by heart. From your satchel comes the shallow bleeding bowl, its lines etched like a clock that measures not time but vitality. You set it carefully on the floor, polished enough to look important. Your knives, wrapped in cloth, gleam when you unfold them. The family stares, their faith already half invested before you touch the patient. You take his pulse, listen to his slurred words, then pronounce. Excess sanguine humor congests the brain. The wife gasps, words always feel like proof. You motion to the boy to fetch warm water. Mainstream fact, physicians believed health depended on balancing the 4 humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. Blood was usually considered the one in surplus. Bleeding became the universal solution. Historians still argue whether it ever truly helped or simply weakened patients further. You bind a strip of linen around a man's arm, making the veins swell like tight cords. The knife's tip pricks, then slices. A thin red line beads, then flows into the bowl. His wife looks pale, but she does not stop you. You watch carefully, too much blood and the cure becomes the cause. After a measured flow, you press clean linen against the wound, tying it snug. You hold up the bowl, a half-inch filled, and declare balance partially restored. The family exhales as if you poured health straight into the floor. Next comes the leech jar. The wriggling creatures cling to glass, sluggish until they smell flesh. You select one, plump and eager, and press it to the man's temple. It bites with tiny jaws, attaching like a clasp. His wife squeaks, you explain gently, the leech draws excess heat from the head. Quirky tidbit, some physicians specified which leech went on which body part, claiming the right species for the right humor. The market in leeches was so intense that by later centuries, pawns were stripped bare, the man groans softly but begins to relax. Whether from suggestion, blood loss, or the soothing touch of someone finally doing something, you can't be sure. You remove the leech after a time. Plump now, and drop it back in the jar with a soft plop. The patient breathes easier. His wife clasps your hand, whispering thanks. You murmur solemnly, though inside you think, or maybe he's just dizzy. Joke 1, muffled, he'll certainly feel lighter. You prescribe rest, diluted wine with herbs, and a poultice of chamomile on the forehead. Nothing too taxing, enough ritual to assure them healing will continue. You pack your tools, wipe your gloves with vinegar water, and stand. Another coin presses into your palm. You bow slightly, because doctors must respect the purse as much as the pulse. Outside again, the world smells of smoke and bread. You trudge toward the next lane where another summons waits. This time, a stout woman complains of aching joints. You listen, nod gravely, then prescribe another small bleeding at the ankle and a warm compress of mustard seed. The neighborhood gathers, eager to watch, their faces equal parts curiosity and dread. They whisper as you prick her skin, the tiny flow of public performance. She grimaces but afterwards insists her knees already feel looser. Placebo, you think, though you'd never dare say it aloud. By midday you've bled 3 more, a boy with fever, a merchant's wife dizzy with headaches, and an old man who swore his stomach churned with demons. Each time the knife, each time the bowl, each time a declaration of restored balance. And each time, the sighs of relief ripple as if you've pulled sickness out by the ounce. Mainstream fact again, the practice of phlebotomy lasted for centuries, even into the 19th, endorsed by learned doctors who cited Galen and Avicenna. Only later did medicine begin to realize the dangers of weakening patients. Historians still argue whether medieval bleeding worked in some cases, perhaps reducing blood pressure in the very few, or whether it was simply ritual that comforted. By late afternoon, your hands ache, your satchel smells of iron, and your mask herbs wilt under the weight of breath. You pause at a fountain, rinsing your knives in water that isn't clean enough but will have to do. You glance at the leech jar, 2 fattened, 3 still hungry, and joke 2 to yourself, at least someone's had a good lunch. You lean against the fountain, stretching sore shoulders. The day feels endless, but you know you've barely begun. Bleeding and leeching are only the first act. Patients will demand powders, potions, charms, and prayers before you earn your bread. You sigh into the beak, wondering if anyone has ever truly been cured by a slice and a worm. Yet as you shoulder your satchel again, you remind yourself, medicine here is half cure, half comfort. And comfort, even if borrowed, keeps townsfolk calm in the face of fear. Joke 3 drifts through your mask, if I faint from exhaustion, I suppose I'll just bleed myself for balance. The square bells toll. Another summons waits. You adjust your robe, gather your tools, and keep moving. The bleeding bowl clinks softly against the leech jar, the music of your trade echoing down the cobbled lane. Your satchel rattles as you step off the lane and duck under the wooden sign of the apothecary. Compared to the tannery or the plague-ridden alleys, this place smells like heaven, resinous pines, crushed roses, camphor, a dusting of cinnamon that clings to the air like gossip. Rows of jars line the shelves, each painted or labeled with looping script, some clear, some guesswork. The apothecary himself, Cap Askew, greets you with a bow that suggests both respect and rivalry, because here's the truth, while you, the physician, pronounce theories of humors, the apothecary provides the matter that makes those theories chewable or drinkable. He is the kitchen to your sermon. Together, you create medicine, or at least something that looks the part. You place a list on the counter, a syrup of violets, a powder of ground pearl for the wealthy lady, fennel seeds for bloated bellies, and a measure of theriac because no respectable household goes without their universal cure. The apothecary tuts, pulling jars with the flair of a showman. Mainstream fact, apothecaries were indispensable in medieval towns, often belonging to guilds as powerful as any physician's college. They stocked spices from Venice, dried herbs from local meadows, and exotic powders traded along distant routes. Their shops smelled of empire. Historians still argue whether physicians truly controlled prescriptions or if apothecaries acted as independent entrepreneurs. Shaping treatment as much as any doctor, he grinds something in a mortar, pestle thudding rhythmically. You watch powders mingle, chalk, fennel, dried rose petals. Into another bowl, he sprinkles tiny shavings of cinnamon and stirs them into honey. He boasts that this mixture will soothe the noble's stomach. You nod, thinking privately it will at least taste good. Quirky tidbit, cinnamon, imported through Arab traders, was so prized it sometimes cost more than gold by weight. For patients, the flavor alone felt medicinal. The door creaks, and a farmer shuffles in, hat in hand. He lays down a few coins and whispers about his son's cough. The apothecary glances at you, then pours a syrup of licorice and honey. The farmer bows deeply, grateful. The exchange reminds you, to most townsfolk, apothecaries are the doctors. They trust the shelf more than the lecture. Joke one slips through your beak, honestly, I'm just here to sign the paperwork for honey and herbs. The apothecary produces a small box, ornate, inlaid with brass. Inside lies a lump of dark paste, theriac. He slices a piece, wrapping it carefully. The Duke's men asked for this last week, he mutters. Snake flesh, opium, 20 herbs, it cures all. He doesn't believe it cures all, but he knows it sells all. You pocket the wrapped piece, wondering how many stomachs it will unsettle before soothing anyone. He offers you a taste of another mixture, an electuary of almonds and sugar. Sweet, almost cloying, sticking to your tongue. For a moment you forget the stench of the streets. Joke 2, miracle cure for low morale. Side effect, wanting more almonds. Together you discuss ingredients: saffron just arrived from Venice, nutmeg from the Spice Islands, dried mandrake root rumored to scream if pulled from the ground. You debate whether mandrake truly holds power or whether it's just another root with a good story. Historians still argue whether such exotic imports genuinely improved health or whether their prestige mattered more than their properties. As you watch him measure powders onto parchment, fold them into neat little packets, you realize this is alchemy and theater combined. His hands know the weights better than yours. The apothecary is half scientist, half merchant, and entirely necessary. Without him, your prescriptions are only words. Before leaving, you haggle for a small bundle of sage and rue, cheap but useful for fumigation. He tosses in a sprig of rosemary with a grin. For the beak, he jokes. You chuckle beneath the mask, sliding the herbs inside. Joke 3, at this rate, I'm less doctor, more walking salad. You step back into the street, satchel heavier with powders and pastes, the smell of cinnamon clinging to your robe. The square outside still coughs and bargains, but at least you carry the illusions people crave: sweet syrups, exotic powders, promises wrapped in parchment. And illusions, you remind yourself, sometimes heal as much as truth. You angle away from the market's clamor and toward stone that wears ivy like a beard, the Priory Gate, where charity smells of beeswax and boiled nettles. You rap with your cane, a lay brother peers out, reads the beak, and waves you in with the resigned welcome given to rain and doctors. The cloister hush settles at once, sandals whispering, doves fussing in the roof, the bell marking the hour with the patience of a pulse. Someone has already sent word, the infirmary needs you. Past a low door, the ward opens long and bright, a nave of beds, sunlight sifting through leaded glass. Sheets smell of lye and lavender. A small altar gleams at the far end so the sick can watch Mass without leaving their blankets, a design choice as practical as it is pious. Mainstream fact: many medieval hospitals were run by religious orders, and in places like the Hôtel Dieu in Paris the great ward faced directly onto a chapel so patients could hear prayers from their beds. Nursing was the daily work of sisters and brothers trained more in mercy than in manuscripts. You nod to the infirmer, the monk who runs this ship like a quiet admiral, and he nods back, as if you are both competent cogs in the same hopeful machine. he briefs you with monkly efficiency, a baker's apprentice coughing scarlet, a pilgrim with feet blistered to riddles, an old widow who hasn't kept food down since Pentecost. You wash your gloved hands in a basin of rosemary water and vinegar. A novice sprinkles the floor with fresh rushes, another carries a little brass censer that persuades the air to act like a gentleman. Joke one murmurs inside the beak, 5 stars for ambience, smells like herbs and slightly used saint. You begin where blood threatens scandal. The apprentice lies flushed, linen spotted. You count a racing pulse, pry gently at his ribs, listen to a chest that crackles like paper. The sisters have already propped him with pillows, slathered his chest with warm basil and goose grease, murmured prayers that double as lullabies. Keep him upright, small sips of barley water, fig syrup for the cough, you say. You do not bleed him, he hasn't the strength for ceremony. The infirmer approves with the ghost of a smile, mercy over method, today. Historians still argue whether hospitals of this age were primarily places of treatment or pious hospices for the poor and dying, looking at the apprentice's careful nest of linens. You decide the answer is usually both. Next the pilgrim. His feet look like maps of bad decisions. The sister at his side has already brewed mallow tea and set a basin steaming, you add a pinch of alum, then tease away dead skin with a gentleness that surprises even you. You smear honey along the rawest lines, yes, your old friend honey, doing battlefield triage since forever, and wrap them in clean wool. He sobs once, more relief than pain. Quirky tidbit, in some houses, the community washed the feet of the poor every week, not just on great feasts, half devotion, half hygiene, all humility. The pilgrim kisses the edge of your glove, you pretend your eyes didn't sting, onward. The widow turns away from food as if it owes her money. You take her pulse, peer at her tongue, and ask the nun whether she's kept the broth down. Barely, the sister admits. You prescribe a posset, warm ale with eggs and a sigh of nutmeg, small cup sipped slowly. You write it on a wax tablet with your stylus, the sister copies it into the house book later with tidy script. At your elbow, a child sniffs the censer and sneezes but declares the smoke tastes like church. Joke 2, you whisper, that's the idea, and the sister smothers a grin behind her wimple. Between beds you feel the rhythm of this place, prayer stitched to poultice, psalm threaded through spoon. The physic garden just beyond the wall supplies half the ward, beds of sage and rue, violets for fevers, comfort for bones that have opinions. A novice pads past with a basket of plantain and dill, the infirmer assigns your recipe for violet syrup with a practiced flourish. You are the outside expert, yes, but here your authority is braided with theirs. Without their hands, your instructions are just Latin in nice shoes. At a small table near the window sits a barber-surgeon on loan from town, sleeves rolled, knives bright, hairline negotiating with the tonsure. He awaits your word on phlebotomy for a grocer with a crimson ear and a temper to match. You check the man's wrist, glance at the wall chart that marries veins to zodiac, and mutter, not the median vein today, light from the ankle. The barber nods, the sister brings a steaming cloth, and you stand at the man's head, talking about his shop until the cut is made and the bull holds a polite measure of persuasion. The grocer slumps, quieter, and asks if he might have broth. Yes, you say, broth and a rebuke from your wife. Even the barber chuckles, you sidestep a screen at the far end where 2 beds hold a cough the ward fears by instinct. You don't bring the beak out in here, it would panic the novices, but you tuck a sprig of rue into your hood and keep your breath shallow. These are likely for the Pesthouse outside the gate, another small building where suspected plague is kept apart, as custom and fear insist. Mainstream aside, whispered to yourself, some houses run separate lazar wards for leprosy at the edge of town, some keep plague in huts beyond the wall, segregation is medicine's anxious twin. You write a transfer note in your cramped hand and sign it with a flourish you hope looks braver than you feel. In the midst of all this, the chapel bell calls none. The ward stills, even moans find a lower key. A sister reads aloud from a book of hours in a voice that smooths the corners off the day. Prayer is not a placebo here, it is pain management, schedule, heartbeat. You stand, head bowed, and let the cadence wash the grit out of your thoughts. Historians still argue whether faith-filled routines improved outcomes or merely comforted the incurable. Your bones vote yes to both. After prayers, you tour the stores, shelves of simples and compounds, jars of rose conserve, gall-infused vinegar for pestilence, linen rolled tight as scrolls. A small reliquary sits above the door, saints' dust said to lift fevers. You neither endorse nor disparage it, you have learned to let hope wear whatever clothes it needs. The infirmary shows you the bleeding calendar, little black dots marking days when Mars sulks and Saturn sulks more. You adjust 2 marks with your stylus, enjoying the harmless power of ink. Joke 3, there, perfect. We've scheduled your humors for Thursday, weather and Saturn permitting. The infirmer's mouth twitches, even monks like a tidy calendar. Before you go, you step into the physic garden. Bees worry the time, a cat suns itself between fennel and feverfew, a living mousetrap with purrs for payment. You suggest transplanting more plantain near the path, too many feet. Too many blisters, and the gardener novice glows as if you'd knighted him with your cane. You leave him debating with a goose about boundaries. At the gatehouse, a sister presses a small parcel into your hand, oat cakes, 2 apples, and a cone of sugar wrapped in parchment, hospitality you didn't earn but will gratefully devour behind your mask. She adds a request, would you return tomorrow to read the grocer's urine and the widow's pulse? You bow, assure her you will, and mean it. Out here, you fight fear with jars and jargon, in there, they fight it with order, linen, and love. It is good to borrow courage from their shelves, the bell marks the hour again. You step back into daylight, beak full of rosemary, pockets full of recipes, mind full of chants that won't quite leave. The street greets you with its old coughs and negotiations, but you carry a little of the ward's calm like a sprig of mint behind your teeth. Whatever argument the town will throw at your hands this afternoon, at least you've seen how mercy, measured and repeated, can look like medicine from the patient's side of the bed. The calm of the hospital garden doesn't last long. Word travels faster than sparrows, and by the time you've eaten one of the oat cakes behind your mask, a boy tugs at your sleeve. His eyes are wide, his tunic damp with sweat. The Pesthouse, he stammers. They need you now. Your gut knows before your head agrees, plague. The word nobody says aloud, the fear that empties markets and packs graveyards. You adjust the satchel, make sure the mask herbs are fresh, and tug the beak snug over your face. The boy keeps a careful distance, as if just carrying the message might infect him. You walk toward the edge of town, where the Pesthouse squats like a guilty secret, low timber walls. Shuttered windows, a crude cross nailed above the door. Smoke leaks from vents, the air hums with flies. The closer you get, the quieter the streets become. Mothers pull children indoors. Dogs slink away. The world knows what waits inside, at the threshold you pause. Mainstream fact, during plague years, special buildings or sections of hospitals were designated as pest houses, quarantine zones to isolate the sick. The theory wasn't modern germ science, but the instinct was right, keep contagion apart. Historians still argue whether the separation saved communities or simply condemned patients to die lonelier. You push open the door. The smell hits first, sweet, rotting, metallic. The perfume of a city's nightmare. Through the smoke you glimpse figures on pallets, faces blotched purple, bodies twitching under fever. A sister stands near the door, face pale, clutching a vial of vinegar like it's a relic. She nods to you, grateful and terrified in equal measure. You step closer to the first patient, a man groaning, buboes swelling under his arms, his breath ragged. You tap his shoulder with your cane, leaning back instinctively. His eyes roll, half seeing. You motion for the sister to bring vinegar cloths. You dab his skin, then place herbs near his face, juniper, sage, rosemary, anything to sweeten the air. Quirky tidbit: some doctors recommended pressing a live chicken against buboes, believing the bird would draw out the poison. You shudder at the thought, thankful you've no poultry in your satchel today. The sister asks in a whisper, "Do we bleed him?" You hesitate. Bloodletting feels like cruelty when the body is already drained. Still, the textbooks weigh heavy in your satchel. Galen says balance, Avicenna says cleanse. Historians still argue whether any intervention helped at all, or whether survival came down to chance and constitution. You shake your head. No bleeding. Poultices, broth if he can drink. She nods, relieved. Next pallet, a young woman barely older than a girl, her hands clenching linen until her knuckles shine. Her mother kneels nearby, praying furiously. You squat, hold the girl's wrist with gloved fingers, count a pulse that flutters and fades. You order a compress of vinegar and rose, then whisper reassurance into the mask, though your words come out muffled, half bird, half man. The mother hears enough. She clasps your cloak hem as though it were a saint's robe. Joke one sneaks into your head even here, miracle cure today, smell enough rosemary, and you forget how everything else smells. You don't say it aloud, but it steadies your own heart. At the far end, two men argue, one a barber-surgeon sharpening his knife, the other a priest with book raised. They debate whether the patient on the cot should be lanced or simply confessed. You intervene, cane tapping for silence. You order the bubo lanced, but only after the priest's prayer. A compromise, half science, half sacrament. The surgeon nods grimly, the priest mutters assent. The patient groans, and the ritual unfolds like choreography rehearsed too often. You move from bed to bed, repeating variations, vinegar washes, herbal fumigations, whispered prayers. Sometimes you recommend burning a patient's clothing, sometimes fumigating the room with pitch. A sister sprinkles the floor with quicklime to tamp down the stench. The air grows thicker with smoke and sighs. Mainstream fact again, plague doctors often prescribed fumigation, burning herbs, resins, or even sulfur to cleanse air. Some wore amulets of mercury or arsenic, convinced the metals repelled disease. Historians still argue whether these rituals offered any real barrier or simply gave people the courage to approach the sick. By mid-afternoon, your mask herbs are wilted, your gloves tacky with vinegar, your satchel lighter. You pause near a shutter, pulling it open for a gasp of outside air. The street beyond looks deserted, but you swear you see someone watching, curious, horrified, unwilling to come closer. You can't blame them. You return to the doorway, exhausted. The sister presses a small loaf into your hand. For strength, she whispers, though she won't touch you. You nod, thank her through the beak, and step into daylight again. Joke 2 creeps out as you trudge back to the road. Well, at least I'm popular with vinegar merchants. The words fog your mask, making the herbs smell stronger. At the edge of town you pause to wash your gloves in a trough, scrubbing hard, though you know water can't wash dread. You peel back the mask for one deep breath of air that isn't thick with plague, then pull it back on quickly, like a diver between gulps. You think of the patient still groaning in the pesthouse, of the ones who will not see morning. You know your role is not cure but ritual, make the family believe someone tried. Maybe that's medicine too. Joke 3 flickers faintly as you shuffle homeward. Note to self, next career, something less contagious. Beekeeping, perhaps. You leave the pest house with vinegar clinging to your gloves and smoke heavy in your mask. The street outside feels too bright, as though the sun mocks you for pretending to fight shadows with herbs. Still, your satchel is lighter, your coins a little heavier, and somewhere a family believes you've bought them another day. That has to count for something. Back in town, another summons finds you, this one from a merchant who insists on the proper hour for his treatment. You know what that means, astrology. He will not let a vein be opened until the heavens nod politely. You sigh and follow the servant up the lane, half doctor, half stargazer. Inside the merchant's house, shutters are thrown wide to let light pour onto a table where a star chart sprawls like a map to treasure. Circles upon circles, symbols of Mars, Venus, Saturn inked in careful red. The merchant greets you with a nervous smile. You see, he says, tapping the parchment, my humors cannot be balanced while the moon lingers in Virgo. It would be folly. Mainstream fact, astrology and medicine were once twins, taught together in university. Physicians were expected to know how planets influenced the body, each sign ruling certain organs, each alignment favoring or forbidding treatments. Historians still argue whether doctors truly believed the stars dictated outcomes, or if charts were simply tools to reassure wealthy patients who demanded cosmic guarantees. You lean over the chart, making solemn noises. You trace Mars's path with your finger, note the moon's climb, and finally decree, this afternoon, under Libra's balance, the humor may be drawn. The merchant exhales, relieved, as though your words alone tilted the sky. He insists you check his urine as well, flask ready, of course. You tilt it toward the window, mutter about moist phlegm, and set it down with a sage nod. Then you gesture for his wrist. His pulse thuds evenly, but you furrow your brow just enough to keep him worried. While the barber readies a bowl and cloth, you distract the merchant with a lecture on the zodiac man, the diagram showing which stars ruled which body parts. Quirky tidbit, manuscripts often depicted a figure splayed with signs inked along limbs and organs, Aries at the head, Pisces at the feet, like a cosmic game of pin the horoscope on the human. Patients loved it, physicians tolerated it, artists had a grand time. The barber nicks the vein gently, crimson flowing into the bowl. You keep one eye on the chart, as though confirming Libra's scales remain satisfied. The merchant, pale but proud, mutters, the stars favor me. You murmur back, indeed, they do. Joke one sneaks out beneath the mask, though I suspect your stars are slightly squeamish. Afterwards you prescribe a cooling draught, rose syrup with crushed pearl, because nothing flatters a merchant more than swallowing jewelry. He beams, convinced fortune and medicine both smile on him. You accept his coins with solemn dignity, though inside you roll your eyes. On your way out, you glance at the chart again. You wonder whether belief itself is the strongest remedy, if aligning with the heavens matters less than aligning with the patient's expectations. Historians still argue whether astrology was pseudoscience or simply an early attempt to map rhythms in nature. To you, it feels like theater written in starlight. You step back into the alley, the afternoon sun slanting long. A child runs past, chasing a dog, laughing with a freedom that ignores humors and planets alike. You adjust your beak mask, satchel bumping at your side, and mutter joke two for your own ears. Perhaps the real cure is simply being 10 years old. Another neighbor hails you, clutching his stomach, begging for advice. You wave him off politely, your satchel is nearly empty, and your herbs have wilted. For now, you'll let the stars excuse your fatigue. Tomorrow, you say, when Saturn is kinder. He nods, satisfied, already convinced. You walk on, thinking about the strange partnership between medicine and the sky. Perhaps one day people will laugh at your charts as you laugh at chicken poultices. Or perhaps they'll find new constellations to explain old mysteries. Either way, tonight Libra has bought you respite. Joke 3 drifts lazily as you turn toward the next street. Note to self, learn more astrology. Patients love it, and the stars never ask for payment. You're barely out of the merchant's doorway when a boy with sawdust in his hair tugs your sleeve and jerks a thumb toward the lane where smoke leans out of a workshop like a gossip. Master says hurry, he pants, there's iron in a man where it shouldn't be. That is the kind of poetry only emergencies compose. You follow him to the barber-surgeon's place, half shop, half theater, where a red and white pole twirls lazily in the draft. Quirky tidbit, that striped pole isn't fashion, it's biography. red for blood, white for bandages, and, some say, the brass tip for the basin that catches what you let out. Customers like signs that tell the truth without details. Inside, the room glows with rushlights and a brazier hot enough to persuade steel. Smoke crowds low, perfumed with rosemary tossed in for bravery. The surgeon, apron leathered, sleeves rolled, hairline arguing with his cap, nods you toward a trestle table where a carter grips the plank with both hands. An arrowhead peeks from his thigh like a rude opinion. 2 helpers pin his shoulders, a third fetches wine with the urgency of a sacrament. You exchange a glance with the surgeon that says, "We will try, and luck will take its own shift." You inspect the wound, then the shaft, then the angle that the archer's bad aim left as your homework. "No bleeding yet," you murmur, partly to reassure the man, mostly to reassure yourself. You call for vinegar and wine. Mainstream fact, medieval surgical texts, Henri de Mondeville in France. Theodoric of Lucca in Italy, often recommended washing wounds with wine, not because anyone could name microbes yet, but because experience taught that wine-bitten cuts behaved better. Historians still argue whether that practical cleanliness was widespread habit or rare good sense overshadowed by the old love of laudable pus. You dose the carter with a swallow of spiced wine, then another, then a spoon of thick syrup the apothecary bragged about, poppy, henbane, a whisper of mandrake, your version of kindness in a cup. Mainstream addendum, surgeons knew the sleeping sponge, a cloth steeped in opiates and aromatics to woo patients toward forgetfulness. Historians still argue whether it brought true anesthesia or merely a fog that kept screams shorter. Either way, you need the fog. The surgeon warms the iron in the brazier until its edge blushes. On the bench, a roll of instruments waits like a choir of unpleasantness, forceps with beaks for fishing barbs, probes of bone and brass, slender hooks, a needle thick enough to stitch shoes. And the saw with teeth you try not to study when you're hoping not to need it. You choose narrow forceps, murmur to the carter about his sturdy luck and the skill of your companion, charm is anesthesia's cousin, and follow the track with a probe, mapping the arrow's path as gently as a prayer. The room pulls inward, the rasp of iron in the brazier, the wet rasp of the man's breath, your own heartbeat playing drum for a band you did not hire. When you feel the notch, you nod, the surgeon slides in the forceps and grips, slow and sure. "Now," you say, and the helpers hold, and the carter roars the way pain roars when it remembers it has a mouth. The arrowhead comes free with a tiny clink, a sound that always seems too small for the trouble it represents. You flood the wound with warm wine, then vinegar, then press a cloth dipped in honey against the opened muscle. Honey again, your old ally, because whatever the century calls it, it keeps rot's teeth dull. The surgeon looks to the iron, you nod, he brandishes the glowing edge, and the room's smell pivots, hair singed, meat muted, so quickly your lungs try to step backward. You don't dwell on that. Cautery seals what steel and luck opened. You watch smoke creep from the seam, not letting your mind draw pictures. The carter swoons into the hands holding him and wakes again with the tide, the wine keeps his memory short. Joke 1 slips out for the helpers as you breathe through rosemary, good news, he will not forget to pay, he'll remember only the wine. They snort, grateful for any door out of the moment. When the iron song quiets, you stitch. Linen thread through skin is a conversation best kept brief. You place simple interrupted sutures, the way your teacher showed you with a goose foot and patience. In your head, you hear Abu al-Qasim al-Zarawi, Albucasis, murmuring from a book copied half a world away, his al-Tasrif illustrated instruments generations before this brazier warmed your hands. Mainstream fact, Albucasis's surgical compendium, born in Islamic Spain around the year 1000, traveled into Latin Europe and taught centuries of surgeons how to cut, clamp, and sew. Historians still argue whether the Latin translations dulled or sharpened his lessons, but the instruments on this table remember his drawings. Bandage time. You pack a soft pad of lint, scraped linen, not pocket fuzz, and bind the thigh with clean strips that crisscross like restraint turned to care. You order bed rest, barley water, more honey on the dressing, and no carting until the river's next market day at the very earliest. The carter groans assent the way a man does who knows the river will not reschedule for his leg.
You tell the helpers to bring him broth and keep his bowels honest, constipation and stitches are enemies, and you mean it like doctrine. There's no rest. A woman with a hand crushed under a millstone waits near the door, eyes wide as church doors. You examine the swelling, wiggle each finger, as gently as you can, and decide with relief that bones sulked but did not break. Splints then, willow slats padded with wool, bound in a figure 8, and a sling fashioned from an old apron cut into loyalty. You rinse superficial scrapes with wine, smear a little egg white and rose concoction because she expects a salve, and teach her how to keep the hand high as a saint in a painting. Joke 2 lands light, hold it like you're blessing every passerby, and it will bless you back. She actually smiles. From the back room comes a groan at a pitch that pulls your feet before your mind's caught up. A youth sits open-mouthed on a stool, barber's cloth around his neck, a tooth black with insult glaring at the world. The surgeon gestures with his pliers. You steady the boy's shoulder, touch his jaw, and whisper, "Bite this strap, then curse me in your head." A twist, a yank, a snap, the room always gets quiet for that, and the tooth comes away like an ugly thought you finally phrased. You swab his gum with vinegar and instruct saltwater rinses, soft bread, no bragging until tomorrow. Quirky aside, many blamed tooth worms for pain, you do not argue with metaphors in a smoky room. You just remove the problem and let the metaphor find a new story. Someone mentions trepanation, a villager fell. Struck his head, and now speaks nonsense with one pupil wide as a coin. You examine him in the yard, palm cool against fevered brow, nail tracing the scalp's tender swell. You weigh the saw in your mind like a judge weighs a case. Opening a skull is not a boast, it is a bargain with fate and flies. You decline. Today the signs say watch and bleed lightly at the ankle to draw heat, then compress with vinegar. If the devil sticks around, you'll reconsider the dance. Historians still argue whether medieval cranial surgery saved as many lives as they cost. The cases that survived became legends, and legends make poor statistics. The afternoon wears down to bronze. You brand 2 small vessels on a man's forearm to quiet a nosebleed that had too much ambition. You cauterize a soldier's nicked scalp where a tavern argument escalated faster than grammar. You stitch a child's knee and pay her in candied fennel for not biting you. Between each patient you wash your hands in warm wine, then vinegar, a ritual that is half prayer, half habit that sits on the edge of discovery. The surgeon catches your eye over the basin and shrugs, his version of hope. Mainstream fact, folded into the steam, surgeon and physician are not synonyms here. You read at the university, he learned in shops and tents and on battlefields where the syllabus is pain. He belongs to a guild and to scars you do not have. You bring charts and blessings of Latin, he brings needles that listen. Historians still argue whether your 2 worlds cooperated or feuded more, but in smoky rooms like this one, the argument usually ends with, "Hold this while I pull." When the last bandage is tied, the brazier's coal winks low. You and the surgeon split a crust and a swallow of wine that tastes of iron because iron has been in the air all day. Joke 3 sounds tired but true, I prescribe that we never speak of this taste again. He huffs agreement, then props the door with a boot and lets clean air come do what none of you can bill for. You step back into the lane with your satchel lighter, your herbs browning at the edges, and your ears still tuned to the pitch of pain. The pole spins behind you, red and white against late light, and you think of how many stories today will tell themselves as the doctor fixed it, when really a small army of hands and hot metal and stubbornness braided together to keep one more person upright. Whatever you call it, art, craft, luck, it has your fingerprints on it, and the city will sleep slightly harder for that. You leave the smoky chamber of knives and brazier and step back into streets where superstition hums louder than reason. No sooner have you gone 10 paces than a woman seizes your sleeve, eyes wide, holding out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She whispers, "For my baby's cough, can you bless this charm?" You unwrap it, a scrap of parchment with symbols drawn in red ink, bundled with a sprig of dried thyme and a knotted cord. You sigh inside the beak. It is not medicine by any lecture you've ever endured, but it is medicine by hope, mainstream fact, medieval medicine never stood alone. Alongside Galen and Avicenna walked charms, amulets, whispered incantations, pilgrim badges sewn to cloaks, and relic dust sprinkled into drinks. Even university-trained physicians had to nod at this mingling. Historians still argue whether learned doctors dismissed such charms as peasant folly or quietly tolerated them to keep patients calm. The truth, survival in this trade often means doing both. You tuck the thyme sprig into the beak of your mask, muttering a psalm over the parchment. The mother exhales relief as though you have banished fever with syllables. You hand back the bundle, prescribe honey water for the child, and move on. Joke 1 mutters under your breath, "Congratulations, parchment, you're now a licensed practitioner." At the next corner a group of laborers cluster around a man sprawled on the ground, moaning with belly pain. They swear he's bewitched. Someone thrusts a wax figurine into your hands, its surface studded with pins. You know the real culprit, spoiled fish from the quay, eaten too greedily, but they want spectacle. You hold the figure aloft, snap one pin free, and declare the spell broken. Then you order the man purged with warm wine and salt. Quirky tidbit, sympathetic magic, dolls, charms, knots, was common currency in villages, and even court records mention physicians accused of counter-witchcraft. You pocket the wax doll, promising to burn it later, though you suspect some novice will melt it for fun. You trudge onward and encounter another patient clutching his chest, swearing he is cursed. You check his pulse, fast but steady, and ask about his supper. Too much salted pork, too little water. You scold him with humor, advise fennel seeds, and then hand him a small pewter amulet stamped with a cross. You carry a few just for this. Sometimes it's easier to give faith a shape than argue about digestion. Joke 2, side effects may include improved prayers and fewer pork dinners. Inside wealthier homes, superstition dresses finer. A noblewoman insists you bless her bezoar stone before she swallows wine poured over it. You keep a straight face. Mainstream aside, bezoars, concretions from animal stomachs, were prized as antidotes against poison. Courts kept them in jeweled settings, convinced they worked. Historians still argue whether doctors believed in their power or merely indulged patrons who demanded reassurance. You touch the stone with your cane tip, murmur Latin phrases that sound impressive, and gesture grandly. She swallows the wine as though salvation is vintage Bordeaux. You remember the reliquary above the hospital ward, the bone dust of saints said to cure fever. You think of villagers hanging wolfsbane on doors, merchants wearing iron rings against plague, sailors carving charms into ship rails. It all weaves into the fabric of medicine whether you like it or not. And sometimes, perhaps, belief itself eases pain. Placebo before the word existed. The day grows later, the shadows of charms seem to lengthen. You're asked to bless a field against murrain, to sprinkle vinegar on a cross carved into a barn door, to whisper over a newborn's cradle. You comply with enough solemnity to keep faith intact. You wonder if Galen would scowl or chuckle at how his theories share a bed with wax dolls and relic dust. One old woman presses a string of beads into your hand, insisting it keeps nightmares away. You thank her, slip it into your pouch, and think, why not? Even doctors need charms. Joke 3, with all these amulets I'm carrying, I could open a souvenir stall by evening. When you finally return to your quarters, you empty the satchel. Herbs, powders, knives, and now a wax doll, a pewter charm, a bead string, and a handful of sprigs. Tools of medicine and tools of belief, side by side, both demanded by the same desperate world. You stare at them, unsure which worked more today. Perhaps it doesn't matter.
The street's thin as dusk presses in, but your day is far from done. Tonight you've been summoned not to a bedside but to a hall where lamps already glow with tallow smoke and benches creak with restless students. A disputation, part lecture, part gladiator fight with Latin verbs. You sigh behind the beak, sometimes this work heals bodies, other times it bruises egos. You step into the hall, its walls lined with shelves of manuscripts chained to desks. Candles flare, shadows leap. At the center, a great lectern bears a volume of Galen, copied and recopied, the ink faded in places where centuries of fingers traced the same words. Mainstream fact: Galen of Pergamon, the great Roman physician, remained medicine's monarch for over a millennium. His writings on humors and anatomy dominated every syllabus from Paris to Padua. Historians still argue whether this reliance on Galen was intellectual stagnation or a scaffold that preserved knowledge until experiment could grow new beams. The disputation begins with a reading, a passage on fevers, their types and causes. A master recites, then invites commentary. One scholar cites Avicenna, the Persian giant whose canon of medicine married Greek thought with Arabic insight and traveled into Latin classrooms. Another insists on Hippocrates. Voices rise like crows. You weigh in cautiously, pointing out that urine flasks tell you as much as Galen's metaphors when you're staring at a sweating tanner in the tannery. A few students chuckle, the master frowns. Quirky tidbit: many universities staged these debates not only for learning but as public theater. Citizens sometimes crowded in, eager to hear doctors argue whether the moon governed fevers or whether phlegm was hot or cold. It was the medieval equivalent of a podcast, though with more Latin and fewer sponsors. Your turn comes to defend a case. Should a patient with melancholic humors be treated with purgatives or music? You argue both, purgatives to cleanse, lute songs to cheer. The students murmur, the master strokes his beard. One rival sneers, music is not medicine. You counter, then why do monks sing to the dying? The room pauses, the sneer fades. Historians still argue whether scholastic disputations advanced medicine or froze it under layers of syllogism. You feel both truths pressing tonight. The debate circles endlessly, each citing authorities, few citing the patient gasping in a straw bed across town. You glance at your satchel, heavy with knives and herbs, and feel suddenly weary of parchment wars. Still, you play the role. You copy notes onto your wax tablet, formulas and ratios, recipes for electuaries. You nod gravely when someone mentions Avicenna's use of pulse diagnosis, smile faintly when another praises Galen's balance of diet, exercise, and rest. You even clap politely when a young student quotes Aristotle with too much drama. Joke one whispers behind your mask, "Ah yes, nothing cures plague like a well-timed syllogism." After hours of debate, the disputation concludes with prayers and the scraping of benches. Students crowd you, peppering questions about cases you've seen. You tell them about the carter with the arrow in his thigh, about the widow sipping posset, about the leech that saved a man's dizzy head. They gape, equal parts horrified and thrilled. To them, you are both practitioner and storyteller, the proof that these dusty theories bleed when touched. You leave the hall, head buzzing with voices, parchment dust clinging to your robe. Outside, the night air feels fresh compared to the smoke inside. You wonder if tomorrow any of these students will remember that medicine is not only written but lived. Perhaps one day they'll write new books that argue with Galen instead of just quoting him. Joke 2 drifts up as you trudge toward home. I've debated humors all night, but my own humor is decidedly low. In your quarters, you unroll your notes by candlelight. The disputation may not cure fevers, but it preserves ideas, and ideas, however flawed, are the bones on which future flesh grows. You think of students centuries hence, rolling their eyes at you as you rolled yours at Galen. It is the circle of learning, as endless as the zodiac wheel you traced earlier. Historians still argue whether tonight's debates mattered, but you know they shape the way patients trust you tomorrow. You close the notebook, pinch out the candle, and let the night settle. Your head still hums with Latin syllables, but beneath them lies the memory of the apprentice in the hospital ward, the carter on the table, the mother clutching her charm. That, you remind yourself, is the real disputation, life against loss, fear against hope. Joke 3 settles into the dark. If Galen himself appeared tomorrow, I'd hand him a leech and say, "Your turn." The university's echoes still hum in your ears when you step into the outskirts of town the next morning. Here, the cobbles give way to dirt, the air loses its perfume of imported spices, and medicine changes clothes. You've been asked to consult on a birth gone wrong, but you know before you reach the cottage that your role will be contested. Because out here, healers do not wear beaked masks, they wear aprons stained with herbs and the confidence of generations. The door opens to a room thick with steam from a cauldron of mint and mugwort. A midwife kneels beside the bed, hands steady, face creased with concentration. Around her, women fuss with cloths, water, whispered prayers. The moment you duck inside, every head turns, suspicion sharp. To them, you are the outsider, the Latin-spouting stranger. Still, they let you in. Sometimes a priest insists on a physician's presence, sometimes desperation demands every hand. Mainstream fact, midwives were vital across medieval Europe, delivering babies, tending women's health, and passing down herbal lore. They were respected and feared, praised for skill, accused of witchcraft when outcomes soured. Historians still argue whether they were rivals to university doctors or collaborators who filled gaps men refused to learn. The truth sits in rooms like this one, where lives hang in the balance. You kneel by the bed. Glance at the mother, then at the midwife. She meets your eyes, not hostile but guarded, and mutters, she needs time, not knives. You nod, recognizing competence when you see it. You offer what you can, check the pulse, prescribe a cordial of honey and mint, suggest cool compresses for the fever blooming in her cheeks. The midwife listens, then accepts the cordial, mixing it into her own regimen. A fragile alliance forms. Quirky tidbit, some midwives carried special birth girdles, long strips of parchment or silk inscribed with prayers and charms. Women would wrap them around their bellies during labor, convinced the words themselves ease delivery. You notice one hanging near the bed, worn smooth from years of service. You do not scoff. You've seen charms calm patients as surely as poppy juice, the labor drags, sweat-soaking sheets. The midwife coaxes, massages, shifts the mother's posture. You fetch more hot water, offer barley broth, hold the lamp when her hands are full. Hours later, with a final cry, the baby slips free, bawling outrage at existence. Relief floods the room like dawn. The midwife ties the cord, wraps the infant, and only then allows you to check the pulse, the breathing. Both steady. Both alive, the family thanks you profusely. Though you know the midwife earned most of it. You bow to her, and she bows back, a small acknowledgement that sometimes learned men and wise women can share the work. Joke one murmurs under your breath as you step outside, all I did was hold a lamp, but I'll take the credit anyway. Further along the road, you find another kind of healer. A cunning woman sits in the sun with jars of ointments, charms on strings, and a line of villagers waiting. She sells remedies for headaches, heartaches, and hexes alike. You pause, curious. She offers you a salve of fox fat for joint pain. You decline politely, though you note the ingredients: fox fat, sage, and mustard, half nonsense, half recipe you've seen in your own texts. Mainstream fact again, village healers blended pagan remnants, herbal knowledge, and superstition. They were trusted because they lived among their patients, sharing their struggles. Historians still argue whether they undermined or supported official medicine, but for the poor who couldn't afford doctors, they were the medical establishment. You trade words with her, debating rue versus rosemary, mandrake versus mint. The crowd listens, entertained as much as enlightened. You admit rue chases fevers well, she counters that rosemary clears bad dreams. You both smile, knowing that for patients, both answers feel right. Joke 2 slips free, perhaps we should write a book together, fox fat and Latin. Bestseller, surely. The villagers laugh, not sure if you're joking. By evening, you've seen births, poultices, charms, and rivalries. You've glimpsed a parallel world of medicine, one where wisdom flows through kitchens and gardens instead of manuscripts. You wonder which will survive longer, the university disputations or the whispered recipes passed from mother to daughter. As you trudge home, you admit a truth: patients don't care about guild titles. They care about relief. And whether it comes from a leech, a charm, or a midwife's hand, they bless the one who provides it. Historians still argue whether official medicine truly served the people or mostly the wealthy. Out here in the villages, the answer feels obvious. Joke 3 drifts up with the smell of mint still in your cloak. Maybe the midwives are the real doctors, and we're just their Latin translators. Evening drops its purple shawl over the roofs, and you feel every mile your feet have argued with cobbles. You smell like vinegar, honey, wine, rosemary, and a modest splash of terror, the scent profile of your profession. Bells pace the hour, slow and heavy. Somewhere a cart rolls toward the south gate with more wood than you want to think about. You pull the beak a little looser and aim for home, where your basin waits with water gone cool and judgmental. You strip your gloves, soak them in vinegar, and rinse your knives in wine you wouldn't drink even on a dare. The bleeding bowl gets a careful scrub, the leech jar, a stern talk: no more lunch until tomorrow. Joke 1 perks your lips: sooner or later the leeches will unionize and demand regulated breaks. The beak you unstrap last, laying it gently on the windowsill to dry. Rosemary sighs out of it like a tired choir. You count the day as you wipe the table. The carter whose arrow you coaxed out of flesh, he'll mend if rot stays polite. The lady with too much heat on her tongue, pear syrup and fresh air will do more than your lecture. The apprentice in the infirmary, breath crackling like parchment, you dared mercy and skipped the bowl, choosing upright pillows and barley water. You'll know tomorrow if mercy was wisdom. The Pesthouse faces swim up, smoke blurred, a loop of faces you wish you could unremember. Your chest does that tight thing it does when the math refuses to add. You whisper the names you bother to ask and hope whispering counts. You tally coins without joy: copper from the market, silver from the hill, a wedge of cheese from the baker's wife who swore your cane alone steadied her husband's heart. A strip of linen pressed on you by the midwife, payment for holding a lamp and for not making the room smaller with your learning. In some towns, physicians draw a city stipend, physicus to the council, paid to advise during plague and to scold butchers about drains. In yours, you live by jars and courage. Mainstream fact: municipal physicians did exist, retained by councils in places like Italian communes to serve the poor and guide health ordinances. Historians still argue whether such posts made care more consistent or merely more political. But the idea that a city could hire a conscience feels almost modern. You open your notebook, the one that pretends to be a ledger but is really a confession, and scratch today into its columns. Not all doctors keep casebooks, but some of your heroes did: surgeons collecting fistulas and arrows like saints collect miracles. John of Ardern, you remember, wrote of knotted bowels and delicate knives. Henri de Mondeville nagged his pupils about cleanliness long before anyone could name a germ. You copy a recipe for fig syrups, add a line about willow splints that actually held, sketch the position of the arrow in the carter's thigh the way your mind keeps replaying it anyway. If any student asks someday why you bled the grocer's ankle and not his arm, you want a better answer than it felt right in the room. On the shelf sits a parcel the apothecary slipped you with a wink: mumia, powdered mummy, brown as old bread. You eye it like a cat eyes thunder. Quirky tidbit: people swear this ground-up antique flesh guards against poison and cures melancholy, and nobles will swallow tombs flavored with myrrh if the price is high enough. You tuck it behind the rosemary and try not to think about what you've just agreed to own. A knock. The steward's boy at the door, cheeks wind-chafed, holding a note with more flourish than content. The master thanks you, slept like a bishop, would like more pearl powder because balance. You sigh, pen a reply about moderation, and under your breath add joke 2: if pearls cure everything, my purse is a hospital. You eat by the window, cabbage stew, a heel of bread you pretend is fresh, a cup of wine that still tastes faintly of brazier no matter how many leaves you float in it. The street sings its tired lullaby, hawkers packing up, shutters thudding, a dog scolding a moon it can't reach. You stretch your hands over the bowl of warm water until your knuckles forgive you a little. The day's theater still clings, star charts and urinals, lutes and lances, charms and schedules. If medicine is a braid of care, comfort, and story, today you wove each strand until your fingers burned. The little shrine waits on your shelf, two small painted saints watching you with expressions both patient and unimpressed. Cosmas and Damien, twin patrons of those who cut and those who prescribe, they hold vials and tools with the calm of professionals who've seen everything twice. Mainstream fact, across Christendom their images hung in shops and wards, their names called over scalpels and syrups. You light a tallow lamp before them and say nothing. They've heard every prayer. They understand when silence asks the same. Across the city, astrology still hums. Somewhere the merchant is congratulating Libra for his steady vein. You glance out at the sky, at the thin scythe of moon stepping sideways through haze, and admit a fragment of gratitude, whether to stars, to luck, or to the scaffolding of routines that keep your hands moving when your mind would like to sit down. Historians still argue whether your craft in these centuries truly lengthened lives or mainly gave them shape, rules to hold, rituals to perform, calendars to mark courage onto. You suspect the answer is both. Sometimes you snatch a person back, sometimes you simply teach their family how to breathe in a room that would otherwise collapse. You sharpen the smallest knife because the act comforts you, steel against stone, spark against dusk. You roll fresh cordage from reed-thin strips and remake two knots the midwife taught you, thinking of her sure hands and the way the women's room expanded to admit you when you helped instead of explained. Tomorrow you'll need more sage, more plantain, more barley, more words. Always more words. From the sill, ere that passed over the river's skin leans into your room, rinsing it. You lift the beak and hold it to the incoming cool as if airing a laundry list of fear. The mask is ridiculous and it works, both can be true. Joke 3 floats out with the rosemary. If competence has a smell, it's vinegar and herbs with a top note of panic. You hang the beak on a peg like a bird pausing in a tree and promise it you'll try not to need it before dawn. You make one last round. Coins hidden where thieves don't look first, leeches tucked where cats can't audition for dinner, knives wrapped, bowl dried, candle pinched between fingers that have learned the heat's language. You stare at your palm lines, wondering which is the lifeline and which is just dirt, and then you blow out the lamp before you answer yourself. In the dark, the city breathes. You think of the day like a patient you've just left, hoped over, fussed over, stitched where it split, perfumed where it stank, prayed over where it wouldn't listen. Tomorrow will make the same demands with new faces. For now, you let the bed catch you, the blanket anchor you, and the unanswered questions float just far enough away that you can close your eyes without bumping your forehead on them. You lie back and feel the bed answer you with an honest creak, straw whispering under linen like a field gossiping after harvest. Your cloak, smoked, honey-splashed, and vinegar-kissed, hangs on its peg, the beak mask bobbing beside it like a tired bird that chose your window as its last branch of the day. Your hands remember knives and cords even when they're empty, your nose remembers rosemary even when it's just wood smoke and night. You close your eyes and the city keeps breathing around you, carts settling, shutters thudding, a cat announcing its existence to a rival philosophy student. Somewhere across the roofs the curfew bell calls low, one of those sensible sounds the town relies on to keep fires and feuds from growing past bedtime. Most places you've worked toll similar bells, draw in the candles, bank the hearths, shut the gates. Mainstream fact, medieval towns often enforced cover fire hours, couvre-feu, not just to curb crime but to keep wooden streets from turning into chimneys. You pinch the wick in your lamp until it sulks to a safe ember and let the room tint toward moon. The day doesn't let go so easily. The carter's arrowhead still clinks in your skull with that tiny sound too small for its trouble. The widow's posset breathes nutmeg through memory. The apprentice's lungs crackle again in your head and you reprop his pillows with your mind, the way you do when the body isn't in reach but the worry is. You count your little victories like rosary beads, a pulse steadied here, a fever coaxed down there, a mother's hand unclenched when the baby finally cried. You also count the maybes and the probably nots. Your breath stutters once, and you let it, a breeze sneaks the window and brushes the beak, rosemary stirs. You grin in the dark. Joke 1, tomorrow I'll patent the smell, ode a doctor, notes of panic, finish of pear syrup. You roll your eyes at yourself and feel your ribs loosen by a rib's width. Small mercies. At the shelf, your casebook waits with its quiet little confidences, the way you sketched the arrow's angle, the fig syrup ratio you liked, the midwife's clever knot for bandages, how Libra got credit for one man's courage. You've begun writing more than you read, which may be its own heresy. Historians still argue whether physicians of your century improved outcomes or mostly offered order and story in a world that starved for them. You suspect medicine is a ladder you climb while it's being built. Today you stand on rungs named Galen and Avicenna, tomorrow a student will call them splinters and keep climbing anyway. Your stomach remembers the oat cakes the sisters tucked into your hand. Your fingers remember the way the pilgrim's feet trembled when honey met raw. You picture the infirmary nave folding itself to sleep, rushes swept, jars stoppered, someone whispering the last psalm. You imagine the Pesthouse too, not because it helps but because ignoring it feels like an insult. Smoke threads its way into that picture as well, a gray ribbon tied to your thoughts. Quirky tidbit surfaces with a yawn. Some people swear by an abracadabra charm written as a shrinking triangle on parchment to ward fevers, letters falling away like heat leaving the body. You've seen one sweat stuck to a child's chest. Did it work? You remember the mother relaxing as the triangle got smaller and think, sometimes that is what working looks like. You try on futures for a breath, a hospital where washing is not just piety but protocol, a lecture where students argue with the sky less and with experience more, a market where the fishmonger learns the word fresh as a religion. You're allowed to be greedy for these. Joke 2 nudges, also a world where Theriac comes with a refund policy. The bed creaks again when you roll to stretch your lower back, your reward for hauling humors up staircases and hope down alleys. You massage the ache with a fist and imagine telling the midwife you have excess melancholic humor in the lumbar. She'd prescribe a walk and a lecture on posture. She'd be right. The room smells faintly of the apothecary's cinnamon that clung to your robe. It's almost festive if you forget what it's masking. Sleep begins to test the hinges. You let your thoughts sort themselves on slow shelves, leeches, still plotting a union, pearl powder, the steward will want more, the barber's steady hand at the table, the priest who paused to let the knife go first for once, the merchant saluting Libra like a shareholder. You smile at the memory of the child in the ward declaring that the censer tastes like church. And at the cat sunbathing between feverfew and fennel, paid in purrs. Sometimes the city is ridiculous enough to be lovable. You flip the casebook shut in your mind and pull a blanket thought over the shop of your head. The twins Cosmas and Damien look down from the shelf painting without frowning this time, which you take as professional approval. You whisper a last apology to the people you could not bring back, and a last promise to the people you might tomorrow. You are not a miracle maker, you are a habit maker. Broth, sleep, clean linen, cool air, patient hands, words that steady. Rituals. Sometimes they catch. Sometimes they don't. Mainstream fact drifts across your last waking span, in towns fortunate enough to afford it. Council sometimes paid a physicist to tend the poor and to dictate ordinances about wells, butchers, and waste, proto-public health scribbled in town records. You smile at the idea of an ordinance commanding less spitting in barley water, and then at the memory of the market boy who sprinted faster than your despair. Historians still argue whether those ordinances were enforced by zeal or ignored by custom. You picture the smug stalactite bowl of the hospital well and vote for zeal when someone courageous is bored enough to enforce it. Joke 3 arrives, threadbare and perfect. If anyone asks tomorrow how I sleep, I'll say, on the advice of Avicenna, sprinkled lightly with rosemary, aligned favorably with Libra, and guarded by a leech named Nigel. You snort once into the straw. The bell marks a later hour, the city pulls its blanket up to its nose. Outside, someone sings a line of a drinking song and then remembers the curfew and swallows the second line. Inside, your breath lengthens, the room gets soft at the edges, and the small ember in your lamp does what embers are good at, glows without asking for attention. You let the glow be your last thought. Tomorrow will knock. You will answer. For now, sleep teaches you the only medicine that asks nothing back. Underscore 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 underscore. Let the noises fade to the far edge of the room. Imagine the market's chatter folded away like a map, the pesthouse door closed and quiet, the hospital ward dimmed to a gentle hush. Your bed is just straw and linen, but tonight it feels like a small boat that knows the river by heart. You lie still and the water under you is steady, carrying you without hurry. Breathe in slow, as though you're smelling rosemary fresh in the beak, cool and clean. Breathe out slower, as though you're letting the smoke of the day drift up and vanish through the roof. In your hands, feel the tools go light, the knife wrapped and sleeping, the bowl polished and put away, the cord coiled like a tame river. Everything that needed doing has been done for now, everything that remains can wait its turn. Let the city step back one street, then another. The stars hang where the charts like to pin them, but you don't need their permission to rest. The twins on your shelf, those painted patrons with patient eyes, seem to soften, not in judgment but in gentle company. Even the leeches in their jar are quiet, little commas at the end of a long sentence. With each breath, make space around your ribs. Gather the soft victories close, the baby's first cry, the pilgrim's relieved sigh, the quiet nod in the infirmary when mercy outran method. Let the heavy things float, not far, just enough so they don't press. If they come back tomorrow, you'll meet them with a steadier voice. The room is darker now. The ember is almost only memory. Your body feels correctly heavy, anchored where it should be, safe in its small harbor. Listen once more for the curfew bell, fainter now, and then let it dissolve into the quiet. There's nothing to do. Nothing to fix. Only to rest, sleep well. Sweet dreams.